So, round 2 of attempting to record this because I suck. Anyway, so quick story about the time I modeled on Santa Monica Beach. I had just moved to Orange County and I was staying with different people, you know, hadn't been enrolled in school yet. I was trying to save my money and become a legal resident of the state according to the school system. So I was working for like the first year, and I was working about 2 jobs during that year. And I had gotten a call, or I'm sorry, a direct message. What is a call? Who does that? Anyway, I had gotten a direct message from somebody that I had known from Washington State. Now, I didn't know this person very well. Like, I don't think I've ever considered them like a friend or like a close person, but I knew of them. I knew their pet. I knew their friend group. I knew their situation. I knew who they were in high school. So it was kind of like, oh, we're both in the same city. Why not? And when I had gotten a message from this person, they basically let me know that they had a startup that they were working on from LA. Oh, did I say that? This person was in LA. So we're not the closest from Orange County, but not that far. But they had a startup that they were working on in LA, and they wanted me to take some pictures in their logoed shirt. And so I was like, well, I've never modeled before, ever, but because at least I know you, and it seems like it wouldn't hurt to do a favor. And I mean, who doesn't mind going to LA for a weekend, hanging out? Who wouldn't mind? We're right next to the water, and I love me some Santa Monica Pier, so we're gonna do it. I was late getting there because I never take the day traffic into consideration. I'm always working at night. I was 2 hours late simply because of traffic. So the golden hour of the day is gone. And I guess it didn't matter because we still took the pictures. I was like, these are terrible pictures. I'm not a good poser. They have to instruct me on what to do, and I'm the one that's in the pictures. This is not turning out, but we're having fun. So we end up getting the pictures, and we kind of like on the way back from the beach, like, hey, do you want to like kick it for a little bit, because it's Friday, whatever day, it's the weekend, and we have plenty to hang out and catch up on. There's me, the person, and 2 other people, so it's like a little shindig. So I'm thinking to myself, it would be kind of cool to see what you got going on. You have a startup. I would love to hear about it. I love entrepreneurship. That's pretty dope. So we go back to their like building, their living situation, and that's basically like where they work, where they plan, where everything is in this place. So, you know, it's not just someone's house. it's all the things. So we go back and we are kind of hanging out. They're showing me their talents in terms of what their entrepreneurship will be about. I still don't really know what it's about because they're being super vague, and I'm just like, okay, it sounds cool. You have like the advertising, you have the official logo, and, you know, merch that you're trying to have. So it sounds like you're really getting it together. And me, I'm a major pothead at this time. So I shouldn't say major. I was like just getting into it. But basically, we're in Santa Monica, and I'm like, well, let's go get some weed because I think that's a socializing activity, and we're all hanging out. I end up spending like quite a bit because Santa Monica isn't cheap. But let me tell you, their weed was garbage. Fuck out of here. Anyway, booty. It was gross. It was not good weed. And I spent way too much money on terrible weed. And not even a lot of it. It was a little bit. It was just, my weed experience in Santa Monica was awful. Don't ever go in a dispensary that has all of the decoration and security and none of the jars. Anyway, so we come back. We're kicking it. We're having a good time, listening to music, freestyling, talking shit about the weed, having a good time. It gets late. It was already late when I got there. So I'm like, I don't want to drive home until at least like first thing in the morning, because I live like 2 hours away. At least at the time I was like, the traffic is going to be bad. Just because it was still like the city never sleeps, blah, 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 blah. Traffic doesn't die down till like 3 a.m. So I ended up staying there for the night. And while I'm staying there, everybody's like laying down, going to sleep. And the main person that invited me decided that they wanted to try to, I guess, flirt with me as we're like laying down. Maybe they were flirting with me the whole time, but I'm not picking up what they're putting down until they try to, feel on me. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know if I like this, but I'm also not objectively offended enough to be like, no. So I kind of, and let me just mention that this was a time where I didn't understand that me not wanting to included me never thinking about doing it until like I'm physically touched. I never thought like, no, you need to ask. I wasn't in that mindset. There was a lot that had happened prior to this that I hadn't really gotten into in terms of like my own mental. So I was just like, I'm not disgusted, but then I became disgusted. And this sounds so offensive to the person, but the issue that I have with it is it wasn't pleasant. It was not pleasant. And I didn't want it to go further. And this was my first time like objectively realizing in real time where I was just like, I am uncomfortable. And it wasn't me being uncomfortable with them as a person. I was just uncomfortable with it being more than anything platonic. Like this physical touch needs to stop. And so I didn't leave. I was just like, no. And so fell asleep, woke up the next day and left. And after that happened, I figured, who doesn't kiss, at some point and then you just realize you don't want to? Who doesn't do that and make, that distinction of like, no, we're not into this. Especially because this person never like acted weird towards me, I felt like, until we'll get into that in a second. But yeah, I felt like it was, a chill situation. I wasn't in danger. I wasn't in a space where I was going to be held hostage. I just was not into it. So let's stop. So fast forward the next day, I go home. I'm thinking to myself, because I saw the pictures, I was like, those pictures were so bad. And this person doesn't end up using those pictures for a while. Like I'm thinking they're never going to use that picture. Like they don't like those pictures. I had my hair similar to how it is now. It was a little bit shorter. I mean, it was definitely more moist, but it was looking similar to this. And I'm telling you, the golden hour was gone. There was you as a photographer, that not having a flash on is important. The pictures were not good. Anyway, so this person, reaches out to me occasionally. And from what I understood from our conversations, we talked about business and running business and having mentalities that apply to being a boss. And most of the time they would be asking me, am I too harsh, or am I not being fair, or am I demanding too much, or am I being too stern, or am I not willing to let the other person have a say enough? These types of questions. A lot of times I would be very much as objective as possible. I would be very much like asking questions like, well, do they understand the goal? Do they understand what the original setup was? Like, this is your startup, so they can't really like dictate you. But of course, looking back, I'm sure there's a lot that I didn't know that had to do with these stories. But, being someone's yes man, I guess that's what they were looking for. Anyway, so occasionally, maybe every 4 or 5 months, we would talk. 3 months at the most, or at the most frequent, we would talk about business stuff, or like, being an entrepreneur. Fast forward, maybe a year later, this person calls me and they're telling me a story that they had just experienced, like a situation, and they needed to tell somebody. And I was like, okay, what happened? And they're like, you understand, you're out here too, and you understand like the hustle and bustle, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, okay, so what happened? And they start telling me a story that has to do with a party. And I'm like, it's not super surprising to get into rooms with rich people because we're in California. So I'm objectively like, okay, that makes sense. You've networked your way here, or, without having heard the whole story or heard any of the story yet, I'm thinking it's not the craziest thing I've ever heard going to a party in LA, especially with a room full of wealthy people. Like, personally, at that point, I believe either I had been at the MTV after party by invite. So I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to shoulder, elbow, with rich people. They thought I was a manager the way that I was dressed. I was managing somebody, but I was just there to be there. And my landlord was like a millionaire, like just casually. So I just, mind you, the place I stayed at did not reflect that, but the reality is still the reality. So I was just like, oh yeah, totally possible. You're in like LA. I'm not even in LA, so I can understand. And so the story goes that he just, and mind you, this was years ago, so please don't hold me to like the exact details of what he said, but he was already speaking in general terms. So there's a lot of me not knowing exactly what happened anyway. So let's just get into it. So he was telling the story about how he had came into this area with a bunch of mansions, and he walks up to a party and basically crashes the party, like sees that there's, an entrance and walks in. And he's telling me that the party that he's in has a bunch of black SUVs. And he's thinking like, dang, everybody got the same car. Like, this must be like, what kind of party is this where no one's showing off like their fancy cars? So he goes into the party, and from what I can remember, he was saying that there was a bunch of wealthy white men in this party, and they basically welcomed him in as if he was meant to be there. And he basically got to see a lot of what they did at the party. What I distinctly remember about him telling me this story is that he kept like trailing off and like not finishing the story of like each detail. But I do remember the cars. I remember the mansion. I remember him just getting into the party by walking in. And I remember him feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. Like, it kind of gave him an air of like, oh, they welcome me in. I'm this non-white male, but I'm here. And so this person ends up kind of like vibe of the story kind of gets a little bit like slower, and it's just a little bit more like processing, I guess, as they're telling me the story. But they're telling me that they kept going through different parts of the party, and each part had like really nice things going on, like, oh, really fancy, I don't know if it was like expensive stuff, and then like food, and then like girls, and then like, you know, like alcohol, like music, all these things. But I just remember that the thing I remember the most from this story is there was a particular part of the party that had them go into a certain area in the mansion, and he like kind of trails off and then like doesn't continue the story. And I feel like this is the part that he's not sharing that is like mind effing him, because he really called me because he's mind effed. Like, what am I supposed to do with this information, kind of a thing. But basically, okay, this is the other part. The people in the party were saying that none of them had their own cars at the party because they had drivers. And then he knew he was around wealthy people because everyone here didn't drive themselves to the party, that kind of a thing. And so towards the end of the party, I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember exactly what he said about the party itself, but I do remember him being like, there was some type of activity or like event, or like the main purpose of the party, I guess, had happened. And he didn't get into any details. He didn't tell me. He kept trailing off. He kept talking about how he was like shocked. That's what I kept remembering. And I just was like, I mean, you're so vague. Like, what? Okay. And I mean, parties happen, and I mean, you sound like you were in some secret cult shit if you can't tell me, but you know, who am I? I'm just some girl in LA or Orange County, I don't know. But, you know, I'm a conspiracy person, so I was already like, that motherfucker was in some cult shit. But I'm like, I don't know about cult shit. I don't know. I'm trying to go to school. Like, I don't know. So I was just like, okay. And the way that he was so vague about it was just enough for me to not be like, yeah, cult shit. But now that I'm like, heard some stories on the internet about similar influencers going to said parties in LA and being like traumatized, I'm wondering if that's what happened to him. Because why didn't you just tell me what happened? And why also are you sharing this with somebody that you don't talk to on a regular basis? Somebody that knows like business, or like talking to you about business stuff, and you're sharing like that your flabbers were gasted, but not also explaining why. So fast forward, we're talking again a couple months later. Like, we don't talk very often. He was telling me like how he and his business associates that I had met, the initial photography shoot time, how they basically all broke up. Like the band isn't together type of energy. Simply because of the same disagreements and grievances that he was expressing to me in the previous conversations. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm not surprised, because they sound like they weren't very happy in the first place. And especially now, because it didn't sound like it was getting better, it makes sense that they're moving forward with their own leg in their own fields and all this other stuff. So I realize now that he probably only talked to me about business stuff and trying to get my advice because the actual like now that I kind of see more of like what his actual business model and plan was, he actually took the main act, you'd say, from my efforts in high school before I knew this man, to host a talent show which displayed his main act as the finisher of the show, where it was that person's first time expressing their talent, and the entire school was very much like supportive of this person's talent because, one, nobody knew that this person could do what they could do, and two, everybody liked this person, and then three, they shut it down. They did great. So I should have known that it wasn't a coincidence that this person had recruited said person to be a part of this adventure or this venture. But looking back, it all makes sense why he kept calling me for business advice. And even to like, ask for my services as like a model for his company, he ended up using those pictures on his social accounts years later. So like he always had them. And he just decided to use them years later. And I'm just thinking to myself, how embarrassing. I forgot I took those pictures. And like I said, I personally from the beginning was like, these pictures are terrible. And they still look terrible, But I guess it's like an abstract picture, like a something that gives you some personality, to have a flash on. But, I just, objectively speaking, I was like, And I didn't really think much of it. But now I'm like, full circling it. This is something I need to add to this. At one point, I became homeless, going to school. And I had asked this person if I could stay the night there, because I think I had just gotten kicked out of where I was at. And I was like, I just need a place to stay for a little bit. And they're like, yeah, come through. You can spend the night. No problem. This is like the only time after the first time, I believe, that I ever even attempted to spend the night at this person's house. I drove all the way from Orange County to LA, to where they stayed, and was parked on the street. And they came outside, and I'm thinking I don't know why I have to wait for them to come in. But basically, this person had asked me if I was up for, hooking up, basically. And like, in the way that they asked, they tried to like make out with me again. And I let them kiss me because, again, I'm not standing up for myself at this point. I'm kind of just like, okay, I asked you for a favor. Now you're kind of coming on to me. So maybe it's my fault for putting myself in the situation in the first place. But then I realized, like, I can still say no, right? No, I don't want to hook up with you. And after I said that, they denied me access to staying at their house after I drove over there. And so I stayed in my car in that spot on their street that night. Because what am I going to do? Drive back to where I don't stay anymore? And they let me. Yeah.